from St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. There's a lot of things you could say about Maria Chappelle-Nadal, but in her 16 years serving in the Missouri House and the Missouri Senate, she could never be accused of being boring or not being at the center of some of the biggest issues affecting the state. Chappelle-Nadal not only played a central role in the debates over education policy and radioactive waste exposure, but she was a defining voice in Jefferson City for a criminal justice overhaul after a Ferguson police officer killed Michael Brown in 2014. Nearly 4 years out of electoral politics, Chappelle-Nadal filed to run for Missouri's first Congressional District primary against Congresswoman Cori Bush and St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell. This is the second time Chappelle-Nadal has run for the seat, as she lost in 2016 to then Congressman Lacy Clay. Joining us now in studio is former Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal, a University City resident who has represented portions of Mid and North St. Louis County in the Missouri General Assembly. Senator, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
So you've represented portions of the 1st Congressional District from 2005 through the end of 2021. You were even a national figure after the Ferguson protest movement. But thus far, Bush and Bell are outraising you by a lot in terms of fundraising. Why hasn't your campaign been able to get more traction?
I started really late in February of this year, and usually you do not start a campaign so late, but I thought it was incumbent that I put my name in the ring for this seat. And I recognize, well, I don't have the same bank as my opponents. What I do know is that people are relying on me to tell everyone what is important in this race, and I'm supported by a lot of people, not only from my previous district that I represented, but throughout St. Louis.
There's been some conjecture, at least nationally, that this race could be a referendum on Bush's criticism of Israel. But this is a plurality African-American district, and both polling and anecdotal commentary indicates that a candidate's opinion on what's happening in Gaza may not be top of mind for black voters, especially older black voters who have a higher propensity to vote. So would it be wrong to say that this race is solely about Israel based off talking with people in this district?
Absolutely not. When I'm out in the streets talking to voters, every single day they're talking about their housing, they're talking about jobs, they're talking about education, and most importantly, they're talking about crime. And so there are varying issues that people care about, and Israel just happens to be one of them. And frankly, for a portion of my former district, there are people who rightfully believe that Israel should be of concern. It is not the concern of 100% of the voters who will go out and vote on August 6th, however.
Yes, because for the 1st District does have a significant Jewish population, though a lot of the Jewish community in St. Louis lives in the 2nd Congressional District, especially after redistricting. So I do want to ask you, because before he bowed out of the presidential race, Biden said that the only way forward was for a two-state solution that features a majority Arab Muslim state of Palestine established alongside a majority Jewish state of Israel. Do you support that idea?
I always have. When I was in Israel in 2009, I understood that it was very important for there to be a two-state solution. And let me tell you, it's not a new idea.
No, not at all.
This is what multiple presidents have talked about, both Democrat and Republican, is having a two-state solution. And I think that's what's fair. I think what people are looking for right now is a release of those who are captured right now.
The hostages.
The hostages.
Right. But is there any indication, though, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would want a two-state solution? I mean, I think he's been trying to undermine that idea as long as he's been involved in Israeli politics, going back to when Yitzhak Rabin was in office. So what confidence do you have that he would actually push for any sort of self-determination for the Palestinians as long as he's in power.
Well, let me tell you, Netanyahu has become more conservative over the course of years. When he was elected around 2009, 2010, he was closer to the idea of having a two-state solution. And over the years, he's gotten more conservative. And that is what the conflict is between where he's at and where we are at in the United States and other places throughout the world.
Do you think that is going to need to be new leadership in both Gaza and Israel in order for there to be some sort of peaceful resolution to this horrible violence that we're seeing?
On the Palestinian side, I see that there needs to be new leadership, absolutely, because where we're at right now is simply not working. However, I think for the Israel side of things, there's a lot of debate in Israel, and they're going to have to figure that out, what kind of leadership they want.
Yeah, because I don't think Netanyahu is popular even in Israel, and there's kind of an assumption that as soon as there's a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire, he could be gone.
It's a house divided in Israel right now.
I want to talk about Ukraine. Would you continue to support providing military assistance for Ukraine's push to repel Russia's invasion?
Absolutely.
Is there any benchmarks that you would be looking for to make sure that our aid is actually being used effectively? Because we gave them a lot of aid right before their counteroffensive, and the counteroffensive was a total failure. So I do understand the mindset that we have to have accountability for what we give them. So what do you think about that?
I think we do need to have measurements that are in place because people back at home are wondering if we're sending all of this money to the Ukraine to protect themselves, then what are we getting out of it? Hopefully, the big phrase is democracy. We want democracy throughout the world, but we also want something that's sustaining. We cannot just freely, continuously send money and not know what the results are and if they're in line in what we're trying to do. But with that said, we have to continue to support the Ukraine, and especially with their.
It's not the Ukraine. I got to say that.
I apologize.
As somebody who is half Ukrainian, calling it the Ukraine is not correct. So I need to point that out.
This is the second time someone's told me that, and I do apologize.
It's okay. I forgive you, Senator. But let's shift to domestic issues. It has almost been 10 years since Michael Brown's shooting death in a couple of weeks, and I think there have been efforts on and off on a federal level to overhaul criminal justice statutes, but I don't think they've been able to make it past the finish line. It's been primarily a state and local responsibility. What would you want to do in Congress, specifically in that space, that you think would make police more accountable and more respected within the African American community?
Well, I want to speak from both sides of the spectrum when I answer that question. First of all, we need to be investing in the lives of young people who get involved in crime very early on. In the last 2 years, what I've been doing is reading a lot of police reports and have found that there are large numbers of people, young people, who have been engaged in crime ongoingly. On the other side of the spectrum, I understand that we have some bad apples in our law enforcement.
We just saw that in Illinois with the death of Sonia Massey as well.
Absolutely. And she's the one who called the police. And when you look at that video, it's very traumatizing because she thought everything was okay. And it was not okay. And she lost her life for that.
Yeah. So is there any policies that you think could be done on a federal level that you think could improve both sides of the spectrum that you just talked about?
Well, I think where we need to start off is the consent decree in Ferguson. One of my opponents who served on the Ferguson City Council,
St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell, for our listeners,
did not vote for it. And that's troubling.
I think he did eventually, didn't he?
Eventually, perhaps, but he did not originally. And that is something that's quite concerning. And when you look at his advertising, it's really misleading as well. But the other part of it, I think we really need to have a stronger relationship between the federal government and local law enforcement agencies. And to some degree, we have that. But, even Senate Bill 5 that we passed in 2015, which was a response to the Ferguson uprising, a lot of that is still not adhered to. And it's troubling because even later on in 2016, there were municipalities in St. Louis County that violated individuals' civil rights.
Yeah, and Senate Bill 5, by the way, the primary aspect of that was lowering the amount of fines and fees that could be in a municipality's budget. But you make an interesting point about the consent decree. One criticism of that approach by the federal government is that it was only applying to Ferguson and not anywhere else in St. Louis County or St. Louis, given that even wealthy and well-funded municipalities have violated people's civil rights before. Do you think that was a mistake by President Obama's Justice Department just to target Ferguson?
I think he was looking at what was systemic at the time, not knowing the complexity of St. Louis County. We have 80 municipalities. And I think that kind of policy would be suitable for places like Riverview and St. Anne, where there is a lot of problems when it comes to police harassment of individuals. I'm thinking about Kajami Powell right now. That was a St. Louis, St. Anne, eventually he was a St. Anne police officer, but he started off in St. Louis City, and Kajami Powell has died because of police violence.
We're talking with former state senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal. She is one of 3 major candidates in the Democratic primary for the 1st Congressional District. You mentioned housing in your first answer, and I would be interested to know what you would do as a member of Congress to help create a more robust residential and commercial housing stock within the district in a way that I think could be beneficial for current and potential new residents alike. And I say that because you want to make sure that you're not pushing people out through gentrification, but there clearly is an issue in the 1st Congressional District with housing and suitable housing stock. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
All you have to do is go to North St. Louis and look at all the vacant homes, the formerly beautiful brick homes, if they were still, in a good condition, would be upwards of $2 or $3 million in Clayton right now. But the fact remains is these older homes and areas that have been neglected for so long really deserve attention in another way. And the answer could be multiple things. One, we need to rehab some homes that are worth saving. There are some homes that we can't save. And when you look at the housing problem, you also have to look at their transportation challenges. All of these things come into play. And so my idea of the federal government doing something proactive is by working with HUD, working with the Missouri Housing Development Commission, which I was a staffer on for many years for the former lieutenant governor, and really draw down the dollars, not just to benefit people who have always been developing housing, but also for jurisdictions and even churches that get involved in housing, and making sure that some of our neighborhoods are not such an eyesore the way they are right now.
So you've been outspoken for years, maybe even a decade or more, about radioactive waste in the St. Louis area and its danger to the general population. But efforts to provide restitutions for people in the St. Louis area has not gone anywhere, even when people across the ideological spectrum, like Senator Josh Hawley, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Congresswoman Bush, have advocated for that bill. Why do you think you would be able to do a better job of advocating for that?
Well, I'm a legislator. I think what's different between myself and Ann Wagner and Josh Hawley is that I actually served in the Missouri legislature for 16 years and served in the executive branch for another 4 years, which makes up my 20 years of public service. But we have to understand that in order to pass legislation, you have to be able to count numbers and understand what you're you're talking about. People are looking at or looking for a legislator who not only can metabolize information but can articulate it. I have been working on the radioactive waste issue for 14 years now, and I am one of the policy experts in the entire state, and I'm proud of that. And when I was doing my 100 town hall meetings between 2015 and 2017, there was not a voice from Josh Hawley. There was not a voice from Ann Wagner. And frankly, there were not voices in my own party that were talking about radioactive waste and why it's so important when it comes to the livelihood of so many citizens who live in the 1st Congressional District. Most of the radioactive waste is in North County, and we have a high number of people who have either gotten cancer or died from cancer, and one of those people who died just recently was Tammy Holland, and I was able to interview her like I've interviewed 1,000 other people.
Tammy Holland
issue.
was a radio personality who passed away from cancer, I think, last Saturday. Continue.
Yes, but I was able to interview her like I did so many other people, and I did a brief assessment of the different places that she lived and associated that with watersheds and tributaries, and that's what I do. That's what I've been doing. Just because I have not been elected for the last 4 years, I have continued in the mission of educating people on the issue of radioactive waste. When we were in our homes during COVID, I wrote a syllabus about what measures we need to take when it comes to radioactive waste to give a tool to people who want to learn about the issue and advocate for the issue in an educated way. And I think that's one of the flaws that Cori Bush, frankly, is having, is that she cannot articulate the issue and the importance of having some of these resources come to St. Louis.
In the last minute or two we have, I want to talk to you about Vice President Kamala Harris likely being the Democratic nominee for president. In fact, Missouri Democratic Party Chairman Russ Carnahan wrote earlier this week, since President Biden's endorsement of Vice President Harris, we've seen an incredible surge of energy here in Missouri, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Obama-Biden ticket nearly carried Missouri in 2008. Both of us were around in 2008. Obama only lost Missouri by like 4,000 or 5,000 votes. Is that what you're hearing too in the 1st Congressional District? And if so, how do you think that changes the primary on August 6th?
You know what? I have to tell you that I love President Biden. And, anyone could have told me anything about him, but I was going to vote for him no matter what. With that said, I think the energy that we have seen of Kamala becoming closer to being the nominee for president is exciting. I mean, you see so many young people on social media who are talking about how proud they are to vote for the first time.
I mean, have you seen the memes about how Kamala Harris is brat, by the way?
Yes, I did see that.
A Charlie XCX. And I was ahead of the brat curve, by the way. I just want to point that out to people, but continue.
Yes, but she is a brilliant, beautiful, phenomenal woman. She's, there are a lot of women, especially black women, who were upset when there was this push to take out Biden. But I think having Kamala reinvigorates the base of the party, and it expands the base, frankly. But women want to see another woman. We want to see a qualified woman. We want to see someone who is of color. We want to have someone who is going to champion the issues like women's reproductive rights, who's going to champion issues when it comes to violence and crime. And I could put all my faith in Kamala. And I think the people who I talk to every day are inspired by her. And though we love Joe, we love President Biden, we need to win in November. It is critical that we win. And the other option is just not manageable.
Former Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal is a Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District. You can listen to in-depth interviews with Congresswoman Cori Bush and St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell at stlpr.org or wherever you get your St. Louis on the Air podcast. Senator, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we're pleased to welcome back Sarah Kellogg, who covers state government and state politics for St. Louis Public Radio. Sarah, Chappelle-Nadal has raised very little money for this race compared to Bush or Bell, but she's well-known and well-connected in University City, a big population center in the 1st District. How does she factor into this race?
I think she factors in kind of as a spoiler to Bell more than anything. I think if you're looking at the people who are looking at, the people who are dedicated to voting for Cori Bush are voting for Cori Bush, and the people that might be thinking of an alternative are now have two options to choose from, whether it's Bell or Chappelle-Nadal. So ultimately, I feel like she detracts from Bell's campaign more than Bush, even though she had criticisms for both candidates, but also her criticism for Bush was, I think, in one, maybe two. And so it isn't more that it felt like she was more, which she should be, advocating for her own campaign versus why it shouldn't be Bush. But I think ultimately she kind of is acting like a spoiler.
It should be noted that all three candidates we've talked to for this race, Bell, Bush, and Chappelle-Nadal, have now embraced Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic presidential standard bearer. How do you think Harris's ascension will affect this contest, and especially since she recently spoke out for a ceasefire in Gaza?
I don't know how much of an impact that's going to have, mainly because that would be a question for the November ballot rather than the primary. And that's what this contest is. The winner of this contest in August is who is going to win in November. So right now, this is the campaign for the Democratic candidates. And I don't know how much of a bump, yes, there is an invigoration there, but I don't know how much that's going to translate to votes in August compared to votes in November.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that just because Harris is going to become the presidential nominee, that means voters in the 1st District are automatically going to vote for one of the two female candidates. It seems like it's much more complicated and nuanced than that. I actually was watching Bell campaign in Normandy yesterday, and he has plenty of female supporters that I saw talking with him.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
As someone who covered this race in 2022, what do you think is at stake on August 6th, especially for progressives in St. Louis who have accumulated so much tangible power since 2020?
I think that is who will be affected probably the most, is to see how popular the progressive movement, progressive slate is appealing to people who might be a little more moderate or a little more Democrat versus progressive. And I think that ultimately, if Bush doesn't prevail, that could be a big blow to that. So, and again, we've talked about the likelihood of this. I hate to predict elections. I do think that if she were to lose, that would be a big blow to kind of that slate when it comes to, people who support the squad and kind of that slate of policies.
And I was talking with a lot of people about this race this week, and everybody agrees it's going to come down to which candidate can get the most support in North St. Louis County and North St. Louis City. There are other parts of the district, South City, there's in St. Louis County, like Creve Coeur area, but that's where the ball game is. And it's whoever can get, if Bell can reduce Bush's share of the black vote, I think below 55%, I think he has a chance. And if he can't, then I think Bush is going to be favored. That's my observation. Is that Sarah Kellogg's observation?
Well, I think you would know more than me on this one, but I think that ultimately you have to factor in the popularity or the bump that does come with incumbency. And it takes a lot to change a voter's mind. And so the question is whether or not he's changing enough people's minds of not only not to vote for Bush, but to vote for him. Because maybe they're not happy with some of the things she's done, but they could look at other things that they do like. So I think there's a lot needs to happen in order to shift that vote.
It is going to be quite the race to watch. It'll be the marquee contest in the St. Louis region. And Sarah Kellogg is St. Louis Public Radio state government and politics reporter who will be watching this race closely. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
You got it, Jason.
This episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum
and edited by Maya Norfleet.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.